In ICU for 45 days. My DIL stole our house and $770K life insurance payout. Then the door swung open. I wonder if silence has weight. Because the silence I came home to, it pressed on my chest heavier than the heart monitor ever did. I had just been discharged after 45 days in ICU. My hands were still trembling when I reached the front porch, but the welcome mat was gone. So was the mailbox with my name. And standing behind the door was my daughter-in-law, wearing my robe, holding my keys. She said the house had been reassigned, that I wasn't expecting this early. They didn't just take my home, they rewrote who I was. But what they didn't know is that not everything had been erased. Not yet. If you've ever felt invisible in the place you built with your own hands, subscribe. Because this story might help you remember that you still have a name. There's a certain kind of quiet you only get in an old house, the kind that hums beneath the floorboards and lingers in the curtains long after the windows have been shut. I had lived in that quiet for years, ever since my husband passed. We called the house the porch, not just because of its wide, creaky, wraparound porch with the view of Maple Hollow's gentle hills, but because every Saturday for nearly 2 decades we held something we called reading porch. We'd line up wooden chairs out front. I'd brew a pot of mint tea, and neighbors from around town would drop by with books, or sometimes just with heavy hearts looking for a soft place to land. My husband, Daniel, was the louder one. He'd read passages out loud, sometimes throw in a corny joke, and the children would laugh even when they didn't understand it. I was quieter. I kept the tea warm and the blankets folded. I didn't need the spotlight. I just needed people to feel like they could breathe here. After Daniel passed, the chairs stayed in the shed, and Saturdays grew quieter. I still made tea, still organized the library we built on the side of the house, with its warped shelves and mismatched labels. Folks stopped coming as often, but I didn't blame them. Life keeps rolling, even when your favorite place stands still. That fall, the leaves came down faster than I expected. They scattered like pages from a book you meant to finish but never quite did. I had been going through Daniel's things slowly, a little each day. I'd open a drawer, glance at an old notepad with his sketches, and close it again. I wasn't ready to let too much go at once. There was an order to the way we lived, a rhythm, and losing that rhythm had thrown me into a kind of stillness I couldn't name. The house creaked differently now. The hallway echoed more than it used to. I started sleeping in the reading room some nights, curled under the same quilt Daniel's mother gave us the first winter here. The couch was too short, but the shelves kept me company. Some nights I'd run my hand across the spines like they were old friends, one for every memory I couldn't carry out loud. Jared, my son, called less. Emily, his wife, didn't call at all. They used to come visit every other month. Jared would fix the railing on the back steps, and Emily would bring gluten-free muffins no one ever asked for. I didn't mind her, not in the beginning. She was sharp, driven, always tapping on her phone like the world would fall apart if she didn't answer fast enough. But somewhere along the way, her voice started sounding like a verdict instead of a conversation. That October, I remember raking the front yard alone. The sky was a low gray, not stormy, just tired. I had raked that yard with Daniel for 25 years. This time, the pile grew slow. I had to sit down every few minutes and catch my breath. The rake felt heavier than it used to. Inside, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and old wood. I had a batch of pumpkin scones cooling by the window, though I knew no one would come by to eat them. It was a habit more than anything, a way to remind the house it was still loved. I pulled out the old card catalog drawer we'd repurposed as a recipe box. My fingers landed on the one labeled Autumn Scones, written in Daniel's neat script. I read it once, then again, not for the instructions, but for the way he always looped his whys. That night, I lit the lantern on the porch, even though no one was expecting it. The wind picked up a little after dusk. I sat by the front window, the same place I used to watch for Jared's car pulling up the gravel road. But the road stayed empty, just the occasional fox darting across the shadows. I went to bed early. My chest had felt tight all day, but I told myself it was just the cold. Probably needed to get the furnace checked before winter hit full. I took 2 of my blood pressure pills, just in case, and curled under the quilt. The clock ticked louder than usual. Every sound in the house felt like it was waiting for something. At some point in the night, I woke up on the floor. I remember the cold of it more than anything. That and the faint smell of mint tea still lingering in the air. The mug had shattered near the bookshelf. The quilt had slid halfway off the couch, crumpled like a flag lowered too quickly. After that, things turned to fog. They told me later it was a cardiac event, that I had been found by a neighbor doing their morning walk, that I had been in the ICU for 45 days. I didn't remember the hospital room, just flashes, nurses adjusting tubes, a clock ticking with no numbers, a hand once holding mine, or maybe I dreamed it. When I came fully, it was quiet, not the comforting kind of quiet, the kind that waits too long before answering. There was a folded note on the side table. Call Jared when ready. No flowers, no family photo, just that. My hands ached as I sat up. The hospital blanket scratched like regret. Outside the window, the trees had lost their leaves. Fall had passed without me. No one had written it down. No one had saved a page. And in that silence, something shifted. Not in anger, not yet, but in the way I saw the world. And in the way I suspected the world now saw me. Not as someone who had built something worth preserving, but as someone whose name was written in pencil, easier to erase than to remember. I closed my eyes and whispered one thing to myself. I'm still here, and they don't know that yet. Not really. And that might be the first sentence of a story they didn't plan for. The ride home didn't feel like home at all. The nurse who wheeled me out to the waiting car was kind enough. Her name was Lorna, I think. She gave me a little nod as she shut the door and tapped the roof gently. But the driver wasn't Jared. Wasn't anyone I knew. Just a silent man in a black cap who kept his eyes on the road and his hands at 10 and 2. The sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that sit just above the treetops like they're listening in. The highway stretched longer than I remembered. And when we turned onto the gravel road that led to the house, I didn't feel the usual flutter in my chest. Only the dull weight of knowing something had shifted. The mailbox was different. It wasn't rusted blue with my initials anymore. It was sleek, black, and modern. And where it once read L. Whitcomb in Daniel's neat stenciling, it now said Wren Family Retreat. The driver didn't say a word as he helped me out, just set my bag by the door and drove off. I stood there a long moment, my cane digging into the porch wood, my knees stiff from weeks in bed. I reached for the handle. The door opened before I touched it. Emily, hair pulled back tight. Nails are perfect. Wearing my old shawl from the reading room. She didn't look surprised to see me, just annoyed. Like I'd shown up early to a dinner party she hadn't finished setting the table for. You weren't supposed to be discharged until next week. That's what she said. Flat tone. No welcome back. No. Are you all right? Behind her, the house looked different. Too clean. Sterile even. Like someone had scrubbed all the memory out of it. The wall where Daniel's portrait used to hang was bare. The rug I spent years patching was gone. Even the smell had changed. No mint tea, no old wood, just something floral and cold, like a staged hotel lobby. I stepped inside without waiting for permission. The hardwood clicked under my shoes. Every step echoed more than it should have. Emily trailed behind me like a hostess guiding a guest. That's when it hit me. That's exactly how she saw me. A guest. Temporary. Disposable. I asked where Jared was. She said he had a call. Something about investors. Then offered to make me tea, her voice tight like a stretched thread. I declined. My throat already felt like sandpaper. I asked which room I should take. Emily paused. Her smile was polite and painful. We converted your bedroom. It's now the wellness meditation suite. But there's a space cleared in the back storage room. Just until we figure out a better setup. She walked ahead like it was nothing. The storage room. Once Daniel's office, then later the pantry when we extended the kitchen. Now it held 2 plastic bins, a cot, and the faint smell of lemon cleaner. One window nailed shut, one bare bulb overhead, and a folding tray table with a single rolled towel. The bed creaked as I sat down. My suitcase leaned against the wall like it didn't want to stay either. I didn't speak. Neither did she. Emily stood in the doorway a moment, maybe waiting for me to protest. I didn't. She nodded once and left. I stayed in that room for 2 hours before I stood again. My legs were trembling, but I needed to move. Needed to see. I stepped out and moved slowly down the hallway. The paintings were gone. The mirror with the frame Daniel built from barnwood had been replaced with something circular and gold. Stylish, sure. But it's cold, soulless. In the living room, the bookshelves had been emptied, replaced with stacks of branded brochures. Welcome to Wren Family Retreat, a sanctuary for healing, restoration, and intentional living. There was a price list, a map of yoga classes, a curated menu of herbal elixirs, and beneath all that, I saw it. The deed, or rather, a copy of it, framed, on the wall where the portrait used to be. Ownership, Wren Holdings, LLC. I turned slowly, my heart beating harder than it had in weeks. This wasn't just a new look. This wasn't a redesign. They had changed everything, and I slept through it. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer where we used to keep the bills. Empty. The cabinet that held Daniel's papers was locked. The key was gone. I shuffled back toward the hallway, passing the guest ledger on the counter. Names I didn't recognize. A note from someone thanking Emily and Jared for a transformative experience. My name wasn't mentioned. Back in the storage room, I sat on the cot and stared at the wall. My hands were shaking, not from the illness now, but from something deeper, from the weight of knowing I had been erased, not forgotten. That would have been kinder. Erased. I reached into my bag for the notebook, the one I always kept with me. But even that was gone, swapped, somehow, for a spiral notepad with retreat notes and a yoga schedule inside. It had a sticker on the cover. Be still. Breathe. I wanted to laugh, but all that came out was the quiet sound of paper crumpling as I pressed the pad flat against my lap. That night, no one checked on me. No tray of dinner. No soft knock on the door. Just silence. I lay down, eyes wide open, staring at the flickering bulb above. The ceiling crack I used to trace with my eyes while Daniel read to me was gone now. Painted over. Clean. They wanted me invisible. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd just fade into the wallpaper. But I remembered everything. And in that darkness, I began to catalog the missing pieces. Not in grief. Not even in anger yet, but with the quiet precision of a woman who had spent her life alphabetizing 1,000 spines and could still find what no one else thought to look for, even in the dark, even when no one was watching, especially then. The next morning, I woke before the sun. My body wasn't used to the cot yet, and the walls of the storage room seemed to press in tighter with every breath. I sat up slowly, waiting for the usual morning stiffness to pass. But this was different. Not just the ache in my back or the pressure in my chest. It was quiet. Not the old kind. Not the porch before dawn kind. This was manufactured silence. Controlled. Sterilized. I made my way down the hallway, using the wall for balance. No sign of Jared or Emily. Just a faint hum from the kitchen appliances, and the distant gurgle of one of those plug-in waterfalls she must have bought to make guests feel calm. I stepped carefully, not because I feared waking them, but because the house didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. Every inch felt rented, repurposed. In the living room, I saw it again. The framed deed on the wall. Wren Holdings, LLC. I stood there longer this time, studying the lettering, looking for the flaw. But there wasn't one. My name was nowhere on it. Daniel's name had been removed entirely. The year of transfer read only 3 weeks prior. During the time I had been sedated, floating in a blur of white walls and tubes, someone had signed my house away. No court hearing, no lawyer's letter, no call. I moved toward the library room. It had been my sanctuary for decades. A sunroom turned into a wall-to-wall maze of shelves, cataloged by memory and touch. I had spent more time with those books than with most people. They had weight, history, thumb-worn corners, and coffee stains that told stories beyond the pages. Now the room was gutted. The shelves were bare, gone, replaced with floor mats, dim lights, and a diffuser puffing lavender fog into the corners. There was a woven basket of rolled towels and a chalkboard that read, "Grounding meditation at 4 p.m. In the far corner, I saw it. A stack of bins, plastic, labeled with masking tape, and I recognized my own handwriting on one. It said, W, Autumn Collection. It was the bin I had packed the year Daniel died, the one filled with the books we had planned to reread that season. I shuffled forward, heart pounding, bent over, opened the lid. Empty. Except for one thing. Tucked in the bottom, like an afterthought, was a torn corner of a recipe card, one of Daniel's. The ink had faded, but I recognized his handwriting. Ginger tea. Add honey before lemon. I held the card for a long time. They hadn't even thrown it out properly. I stood back up and scanned the rest of the room. I found another bin behind a row of folded yoga mats. This one is labeled L, Kitchen Extras. I opened it. Inside were mismatched mugs, one of Daniel's cast iron pans, and the kettle with the chipped handle we used every Sunday morning. They didn't sell everything then, just boxed it up, buried it, as if waiting for me to disappear. I left the room before the lavender fog could make my stomach turn. Back in the hallway, I saw something on the side table. A new delivery. Envelopes with their retreat logo. A manila folder sticking out. I didn't stop to think. I just picked it up and carried it to the storage room. Inside were brochures, branded thank you notes, and tucked behind them, a draft email printout. It was from Emily. Subject line, Lake House rebranding proposal. I read every line. In it, she described plans to scale the retreat concept across similar rural properties. She referred to the porch as a pilot location. She highlighted its quaint original owner as a marketing advantage for authenticity, then listed long-term goals, removal of legacy structures, property consolidation, wellness licensing. The way she wrote about my house, about me, felt surgical. I was a feature, a relic, something that added narrative value, but needed to be phased out eventually. I felt something rise in my throat. Not grief, not yet. It was the beginning of a line I wasn't ready to say aloud, a sentence that would sit in my spine for days before becoming action. I set the folder down and opened my suitcase. Among the few things they let me bring back from the hospital was a sweater Daniel gave me our last Christmas together. I reached into the lining. There, tucked deep in the pocket, was my small leather address book. They hadn't found it, or maybe they didn't think it mattered, but it mattered. Inside were names of neighbors, old friends, the number for Daniel's cousin Raymond, who once worked in estate planning. My hands shook as I traced the ink. Some names were likely out of date. Some may not remember me, but they were mine. And so were the memories. I closed the book gently and placed it beside the folded recipe card. Two things they had failed to erase. I spent the rest of the day quiet, watching. Emily bustled through the house, giving a tour to two women in athletic wear. They giggled at the reading room, called it adorable, and asked if it came with sound bath sessions. Jared appeared around lunch, took a call outside, and disappeared again. No one knocked on my door. No one asked if I needed anything. But I didn't need comfort. Not now. What I needed was clarity, and I was starting to find it in the places they forgot to hide. That night, I lay in the cot and stared at the ceiling. I didn't cry, not even when the lights flickered, and I remembered the way Daniel used to change the bulbs before they dimmed. I just whispered 3 words. They moved fast. And I'm moving slower, but I'm still moving. They won't see it coming. Not yet. But they will. The afternoon sun spilled into the back corner of the garden where the old brick path met the rosemary bush. I hadn't been out there in months. My steps were slower than they used to be, and the cane sank a little into the soft soil. But I needed air. Real air. Not lavender fog and filtered silence. Just birds, wind, and dirt. The rosemary had grown wild, sprawling over the walkway like it had been waiting for someone to brush it back into place. I touched a branch, felt the oils cling to my fingertips. It reminded me of Sunday roast, of Daniel leaning over the stove, sleeves rolled up, humming something out of tune. They hadn't pulled it out yet. I followed the path to the shed, a squat wooden structure we used for tools and holiday decorations. The lock was new, a keypad now, not the old brass latch. I stood there a moment, pretending I was just out for a stroll, pretending I wasn't remembering the day Jared helped install that keypad last fall. He had used my birthday as the code. I typed it in. The door opened. The air inside was stale but familiar. The dust hadn't been wiped. They must have forgotten this corner of the property. Or maybe Emily didn't see value in garden sheds. I stepped inside, careful not to disturb anything yet. Stacks of boxes lined the walls, some labeled, some not. I recognized the handwriting on one. Winter linens. That was mine. And another, old frames. I opened it slowly. Inside were the picture frames that used to line our hallway. Photos from Maine, Oregon, that road trip through Utah, where we ran out of gas and ended up in a tiny diner that served cherry pie so sour Daniel nearly choked. Each frame had been wrapped in newspaper, neatly tucked away, out of sight, out of memory. At the bottom of the box, beneath a broken glass panel, was a sealed envelope, yellowed. No stamp, just a name, written in ink that had bled a little from time. To Lois, my name. I sat on the wooden stool beside the garden tools and opened it with hands that felt too large, too clumsy. Inside was a letter. Daniel's handwriting. It wasn't dated, but I knew it was written near the end. The tone was too still, too final. He wrote about the insurance policy, how he had changed the beneficiary back to me after a brief lapse when Jared convinced him otherwise. He apologized for not telling me sooner, said he had worried it would cause another argument, and he didn't want our last months clouded by more tension. But he had done it. He had filed the forms, updated the documents, and even included a photocopy of the confirmation page. Folded behind the letter, I held it up to the light. There it was. Daniel Whitcomb Policy number 774203B. Primary beneficiary, Lois Whitcomb. Signed, time-stamped. I read it twice, then a third time. I ran my fingers along the crease where the paper had been folded for so long. It was real. And it meant that if the payout had gone to Emily, as the emails in her file suggested, then something had gone very wrong, or very right, depending on who you were. I looked around the shed. Beside the box of frames was another bin labeled Financials. I pulled it closer, opened the lid. Inside were folders, tax returns, old bank statements, mortgage payoffs, all organized in the way Daniel liked. Rubber bands, tabs, and paper clips exactly where they should be. I took out the most recent binder, opened it to the back pocket. Another envelope. This one was addressed to Raymond Keller, Daniel's cousin, the estate lawyer. The envelope was unsealed, and inside was a printed summary of the trust updates Daniel had wanted to file. Notes in the margins. His handwriting again. Outlines of how the house would stay in my name unless a formal transfer was agreed upon by both spouses. He had signed it, but never mailed it. It had a sticky note attached. Lois, talk to Ray if I don't get to this. He's discreet. I stay very still. In less than 20 minutes, the shed had given me more truth than the house had in 3 weeks. I tucked the letter, the insurance form, and the trust summary into my coat pocket, zipped it shut, stood carefully. My knees were trembling, but I wasn't afraid of falling. I was afraid of forgetting, and now I wouldn't. I made my way back toward the house, pausing only to pluck a small branch of rosemary, just something to hold in my hand, something that reminded me who I was before Emily's smile turned the air cold. Inside, the retreat was quiet. Probably nap hour or breath work. I didn't care. I went straight to the storage room and locked the door from inside, laid out the documents on the cot like puzzle pieces. I took photos with the disposable phone I had hidden in the lining of my suitcase. I had slipped it on the day I left the hospital, just in case. And now, just in case. I called the number in the address book, Raymond Keller. It rang 4 times. Then I went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Not yet. I wasn't ready to speak, but I was ready to plan. That night, I opened the window a crack. Let the air in. Let the sound of the crickets dull the silence of the walls. I placed the rosemary branch on the windowsill, a marker for what I still had, what they hadn't taken. Not yet. Not ever. The next morning, the sky looked like it had forgotten how to be blue. A thick gray hung low, muting everything in sight. I waited until the house was still, until I heard the sound of Emily's SUV rumbling out of the gravel drive and fading toward town. She had taken a yoga group to the lake, probably for photos and breathing rituals. I didn't need to guess where Jared was. He usually disappeared on these mornings, claiming business calls and errands, though I knew he preferred not to be seen unless it benefited him. I slipped out the back door with a folded scarf, my coat, and the address book tucked deep in the inner pocket. The scarf was mostly for show, draped around my shoulders to make me look like I was just out for a little walk. I took the gravel path past the rosemary and down the slope, far enough that no one would see from the kitchen windows. Then I turned left at the bend and made my way toward the public library. It had been years since I walked that route. The dirt path had narrowed, the roots more exposed, but the rhythm of it came back to me. The creek on my left, the fallen pine where Daniel once carved our initials with his penknife. I passed it without stopping. The town's library sat on the edge of a slope facing the park, a modest brick building with arched windows and a flag that had seen better days. I slipped in the side door near the archives, the same door we used when we volunteered for the historical committee. No one noticed me. I moved slowly, deliberately. An old woman in a coat with a scarf. Nothing remarkable. Inside, the smell hit me first. Paper, glue, dust warmed by morning sun. I walked past the computers and into the back corner where they kept the public records. The shelves hadn't changed. The filing drawers are still labeled in neat black letters. I found the one marked Real Estate Transfers and pulled it open. There it was. Wren Holdings LLC transfer date, March 9th. Prior. Owner, Lois Whitcomb. Executor, Jared Whitcomb, acting agent. Witness, Emily Lake Whitcomb. I stared at it for a long time. My name, lined through like an expired coupon. It didn't mention Daniel's name. No co-signature. Just mine, printed in a way that didn't feel like mine. There was no way I had signed anything on March 9th. I was in a hospital bed, unconscious, with a tube in my throat. I copied the page with the small library copier in the corner. It made a wheezing noise, like it hadn't been used in months. The paper that slid out was warm, the ink slightly smudged on the bottom. I folded it and placed it into my coat pocket with the others. I asked the clerk if Raymond Keller had come in recently. She looked up from her desk, blinked a few times, and said she wasn't sure. I didn't push it, just thanked her and made my way to the small reading nook by the east window. It had always been quiet there, hidden by high shelves and a broken radiator. I sat and took out my phone. I dialed Raymond again. This time, he picked up. There was a moment of silence after I said my name, a pause that told me he hadn't forgotten me, even after all these years. He asked where I was, and I told him. He arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing his courthouse badge and carrying a brown leather briefcase like he had since the 90s. He looked older, a little hunched, but sharp. His eyes scanned my face. Then the envelope I held out to him. I handed him everything. The letter from Daniel, the insurance form, the trust notes, and the copied page from the real estate transfer. He read them without speaking. Then he looked at me. His voice was quiet, careful. He said he remembered Daniel calling him the year before he passed. They had spoken about changes to the trust, about protecting the house, but Daniel had never followed up with signed documents. I asked if what Emily and Jared did was legal. He didn't answer right away. He took a long breath and said, "In most cases, power of attorney doesn't survive the death of the person who granted it. If Daniel had granted Jared any such authority before passing, it should have expired the moment he died. And as for the house transfer, if the signature was forged or taken under duress, it wouldn't hold in court." He said we would need to prove 3 things. 1, that I was incapacitated at the time of the signature. 2, that the documents were processed without proper consent. 3, that I had evidence Daniel intended otherwise. I had all 3. Raymond asked if I was ready to move forward. I said not yet. He didn't question me. Instead, he placed the documents into a folder, labeled it with his initials, and promised to begin quiet checks on the transfer filings. He would speak to a notary specialist and pull hospital records to confirm my ICU timeline. He told me he wouldn't file anything official until I said so. Then he stood, touched my shoulder lightly, and said I still looked like the strongest woman he knew. I waited until he left before getting up. Outside, the sky had cleared slightly, just enough light to throw shadows on the sidewalk. I walked slowly back toward the house, not because I was tired, but because I was thinking. Not about revenge, not even about justice, but about return, how a person can return to herself, not all at once, not in flames, but quietly, one signature at a time, one visit at a time, one truth at a time. The rhythm of retreat life returned quickly after that morning at the library. Smooth voices drifted through the walls, spa music, the faint clang of crystal bowls, and the occasional burst of laughter from strangers who thought they were guests. I stayed invisible. That has become my strength. I moved like smoke, quiet, patient, watching. Emily floated through the house like a practiced hostess, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled to just the right length, always holding a mug of something warm and herbal. Jared stayed mostly behind the scenes. His voice rose occasionally from the office down the hall, deep and clipped, laced with tension when he didn't know I was listening. But I was always listening now. Every morning, I swept the back path with a small broom. It was a task I'd claimed as mine to stay active, but really, it gave me cover. I placed the broom just beside the storage room door, took slow walks past the kitchen window, and noticed what disappeared from the drawers, what arrived in new packages, what changed color or scent. Every afternoon, I visited the shed again. Not to rummage, but to document. I brought the disposable phone each time, snapping silent photos of every document, label, and box. I found an old receipt for a safe deposit box Daniel had once kept, tucked inside an envelope marked Private Legal. I added it to the growing archive. Then came the fire pit. It was the third evening since my meeting with Raymond. The retreat guests had gathered outside for a letting go ceremony. They each wrote something on a slip of parchment and tossed it into the flames. Emily stood in the center, her voice soothing, like a lullaby for broken adults. I watched from the porch. After they dispersed, she stayed behind to clean. I saw her lean into the storage bin beside the pit and pull out a red folder. Not one of mine. New, slim. She held it carefully, glanced around, and slid it into the base of the fire pit beneath a half-burned log. She lit the edge and stepped away. But the flames caught slow. Paper curled, but didn't vanish. She went inside. I waited 10 minutes. Then I moved. The coals were warm, but the flames had died. I used the metal poker to pull what was left. The folder was scorched, but not gone. Most of the contents had turned black and curled, but the last few pages had only browned at the edges. I pulled them free and smothered the heat with a damp towel from the nearby basket. Back in the storage room, I spread them on the cot. It was a list, a spreadsheet. Guest names, payment logs, donor tiers, and beside some of the entries, little notes. One read, "Push to Legacy Retreat Package." Another said, "VIP Grief Narrative. Offer porch access." But one line chilled me. "LL recovery is slow. File insurance withdrawal under the Wellness Fund." LL. That was me. They had turned the insurance payout into a business expense, buried it in a program called the Healing Legacy Fund. Jared's name was listed as administrator. I stared at it until the words blurred. Then I took a photo. That night, I called Raymond again. His voice was firmer now. He had spoken to someone at the notary office and confirmed that my signature on the property transfer had been submitted by scan. No physical verification. No witness from the facility where I'd been staying. He was filing a request to freeze any future transactions involving the house. I asked if Emily and Jared would find out. He said not right away. I thanked him and hung up. The next morning, I began my new routine. Every day at 10, I sat in the breakfast room with my old planner and a pen. I circled dates, rewrote numbers, and created lists. Emily noticed once and smiled politely, said something about how organized older women always are. I nodded. Inside, I added her smile to the list of things I would never forget. By noon, I'd walk to the edge of the property, where the mailbox still stood beside the road. I began sending small envelopes to Raymond, copies, notes, details, all in my handwriting. No return address, just the initials LW. By evening, I'd sort what I learned that day, like the overheard phone call Jared had with someone about clearing the title for expansion. Or the new guest who whispered to another that the woman in the storage room gave her chills. That night, I slept with the red folder beneath the cot, like a child with a secret. But I was no child. I was a woman reclaiming her name, piece by piece, without shouting, without drama, just facts, just evidence, and soon that would be enough. The invitation was printed on ivory cardstock with gold foil at the edges and looping calligraphy that read, Legacy Gala, a celebration of healing and renewal. Emily placed one on every pillow in the guest rooms, on the kitchen counter, even beside my folded blanket in the storage room. She said it out loud that morning, like a hostess on a cruise ship. The event would be held on the back lawn, under rented lights and chandeliers, with live music and a catered dinner. They were expecting donors, influencers, and a few city council members. Jared had managed to get the local paper to cover it. They wanted to present the retreat as a model of sustainable wellness. They wanted applause, praise, photographs. But I had something else in mind. That week, the house became a flurry of movement. Tables arrived. Florists came to measure spaces. A rental truck delivered white chairs, linen drapes, and bamboo lanterns. Emily had a clipboard again. Jared paced the hallway more than usual. I heard him muttering into his phone about permits, about projections, about capitalization of future assets. I moved like always, unseen, steady. My job was to fold napkins. Emily gave me that task like she was doing me a kindness. I sat at the breakfast nook and folded until my fingers ached, until I had memorized the names of every guest printed on the seating chart left unattended on the kitchen table. That night, I called Raymond again. His voice was different now. Confidence. He told me the investigation was progressing quietly. The transfer of property had been flagged for review. The life insurance claim had been traced to a corporate account under Wren Holdings. Most important, he had filed a motion with the court to temporarily freeze all assets connected to that account. He reminded me not to say a word. I didn't. I just folded another napkin. On the day of the event, the sky bloomed clear and full. Not a single cloud. The lawn sparkled with glassware and floral arches. Women in long dresses moved among tables, sipping rosé. Men in blazers loosened their collars under the sun. Jared wore a navy suit. Emily wore a soft green gown that shimmered as she walked. She passed me once and said I looked presentable. I smiled. I wore a navy blouse with black slacks. I pinned my hair back. Simple, neutral, like a shadow. When the music started, Emily took the stage. She thanked the guests, spoke of healing, of transformation, of resilience. She told the story of how the house had come to them after a family loss, how they had chosen to build something from grief, something beautiful. Her voice cracked on cue. There was a small round of applause. Then Jared spoke. He didn't mention me, not once. He mentioned their investors, their mission, their future plans. He announced a new expansion wing for long-term wellness residents. The crowd clapped louder for that. I stood behind the trellis near the dessert table. I didn't need to be seen, because I had already been heard. 3 days ago, I mailed a sealed packet to the journalist from the local paper who would attend the event. Inside, a notarized letter from Raymond, evidence of the property transfer during my ICU stay, documentation of the life insurance policy Daniel had set aside, the spreadsheet from the red folder, and a letter from me. It was brief. It explained what the house had meant to me, what it still meant. That evening, I saw the journalist standing by the bar. She held the envelope in her bag. She watched Jared like someone watching a man hold stolen silver. I turned away and walked toward the lake. From the edge of the dock, the lights from the lawn glittered on the water. The laughter behind me sounded distant, hollow, like a performance winding down. I stayed there for a long while. When I returned to the house, I found something on my cot. An envelope. Inside was a brochure mock-up. The new expansion. On the cover, a photo of the house. But my name was gone. No mention of the Whitcombs. No history. Just branding. Just a logo. I folded it once, then again, and placed it under the cot. That night, the guests danced under paper lanterns. Emily twirled barefoot. Jared laughed too loudly. The journalist stood quietly near the edge, not taking notes, just watching. And I watched her, because I knew what would come next. They thought this was a celebration. They didn't know it was a countdown. 2 mornings after the gala, I sat on the back porch, the sun barely touching the tops of the pine trees. There was a chill in the air that hadn't been there the week before. It felt like something had shifted. Quietly. Permanently. Emily had started the day in a rush. I heard her on the phone before the coffee finished brewing. Her voice, sharp and confused, echoed down the hallway. Something about a bank delay. A missing approval. Then Jared's voice followed, low and tense, the way it used to get when he didn't want me to hear his fear. But I wasn't behind the door anymore. I was right there in the walls. I was the silence between their words. Later that morning, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Wren Holdings, LLC. Jared opened it at the kitchen counter, his back to me. I saw the lines stiffen in his neck. He read it 3 times before tossing it into the sink. No one spoke. By lunch, 2 more envelopes came. And then the phone calls started. Emily walked up and down the back porch, whispering to someone she called Maggie from accounts. Her pace was fast, her hand gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. She didn't say my name, but every time she passed by the window where I sat pretending to sew a button, her eyes flicked toward me. That afternoon, the first car arrived. It wasn't loud. It was a gray sedan, clean and quiet. A woman in a black blazer stepped out. She carried a leather folder and moved with the slow confidence of someone who didn't need to explain herself. I watched from the side of the porch as she approached the front door. Emily answered. The door didn't stay open long, but long enough for me to hear 2 words. Court order. Jared appeared minutes later, shirt untucked, mouth tight. The 3 of them spoke in hushed tones just beyond the doorframe. I couldn't make out everything, but I heard the word freeze. I heard pending investigation. I heard full audit. Then I heard silence. They didn't come looking for me, but they didn't need to. By the next morning, half the scheduled guests had canceled their upcoming retreats. One of the donors requested a full refund. The staff, young people from town hired for part-time work, started asking quiet questions. What was happening? Why payroll hadn't cleared? I kept my head down, but I listened harder than ever. That night, Jared paced the hallway again. I heard him in the office, clicking through emails. Emily slammed a door upstairs. Then it went quiet. Just past midnight, I walked out onto the back porch. The moon was high, silver on the lake. The house behind me was breathing in sharp, shallow gasps. I stood there for a long time. Then I turned and looked at the house. This house. My house. They had filled it with new paint, new furniture, new names on guest forms, but they couldn't erase what was buried in its walls. They couldn't strip out the sound of Daniel's voice in the kitchen, or the way my mother's quilt used to hang on the stairwell. They could never clean out the way the front door still groaned after rain. This place wasn't theirs, and soon they would know it. In the morning, I was sipping tea at the table when Emily came down the stairs. She didn't smile. Her eyes were dark and puffy. She poured coffee, her hands shaking, then leaned against the counter without looking at me. "You should know," she said, her voice low. "The business account is frozen. We're not sure why." I nodded. She didn't say anything else. She just stood there, waiting for me to react. But I didn't, because I already knew. The next envelope arrived at noon. This one was hand-delivered. The courier wore no uniform, just a gray jacket and clean shoes. He didn't ask for a signature. He left it in Jared's hands and walked away without a word. When Jared opened it, I saw his shoulders drop. Not the way a man relaxes, the way a man gives up. He didn't speak to Emily the rest of the day. That evening, I received my own envelope. Raymond had sent it directly to me. Inside was a short update. The judge had granted a temporary injunction. The property could not be sold, mortgaged, or used in any financial transaction until the matter was resolved in court. Wren Holdings had 7 days to respond to the allegations. And for the first time in months, my name, Lois Whitcomb, was listed as the rightful plaintiff. That night, the house felt smaller, not because of walls or windows, but because secrets don't take up much space once they're exposed. I walked to the storage room and sat on the cot. I looked around at the boxes, the folded towels, the single lamp that always hummed when it got too warm. I reached into the small drawer beside me and pulled out the red folder. The edges were still singed, but the truth inside was still whole. And now it has begun to speak. The next morning felt too quiet. No music from the speakers. No calls bouncing down the hall. No footsteps from Emily's heels pacing across the hardwood. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the birds outside, steady and distant. I sat at the kitchen table with a warm mug between my hands. Not coffee, just ginger tea. Simple, soothing. I hadn't touched coffee since Daniel passed. Somehow the smell no longer comforted me. Across from me, the empty chair Jared once filled as a boy looked heavier than usual. I could still see him there, 10 years old, swinging his legs under the table, telling me about a paper he wrote for class. His voice was full of dreams then. He wanted to be a forest ranger. Said he liked quiet places. Now the quiet had returned, but it didn't suit him anymore. He walked into the kitchen mid-morning. His shirt was wrinkled, the collar slightly askew. His beard is unshaved. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe he just looked like someone whose mask no longer fit. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he sat across from me. He folded his hands. I didn't offer anything. Not sympathy, not warmth, not even anger. He broke first. They said the house is in question now. I nodded. They said the life insurance might be misappropriated. I didn't answer. I don't know what Emily was thinking. That one stung, not because of what he said, but because I knew he believed it. Blaming her was easier, safer. It let him stay halfway decent in his own mind. I could see the flicker of guilt, yes, but buried beneath layers of practiced detachment. I just wanted to build something people would respect. He was still trying to frame it as vision, as an effort, not theft. I thought you'd be proud, he added. That broke something in me, not because I wasn't proud, but because I finally realized he truly didn't understand what pride looked like. He thought it came with applause, articles, gala lights, not quiet dignity, not sleeping on a cot and watching your mother fold napkins for a business built on her own erased life. I set down my mug. You made your choices, I said. And now the truth is making its way back. He looked down at the table, tracing a groove in the wood with his thumb. The same groove Daniel once carved by accident when assembling a school project with Jared. She said we had no choice. The insurance payout would take too long to process in your name. She said we'd make it right once the center took off. That part didn't surprise me. Emily was always strategic. She had a way of tying ethics into knots until they looked like noble plans. "But you signed the papers," I said. He nodded, slowly. "I was in the hospital. I couldn't speak for myself. You took advantage of that." His eyes lifted toward mine. "You're still my mother." That was true, and still is, but it doesn't change what's been done. There was a long pause. "I'm not going to fight you," he said. I tilted my head slightly. "I know the money's frozen. I know the center's reputation is ruined. I know it won't survive this." His voice cracked then, just slightly. A boy again, trying to explain a broken vase before I saw the pieces. "I came here today to give you the documents," he said, reaching into a folder on the chair beside him. He slid the papers across the table. "Transfer of title." His signature was already scrawled in black ink. "You'll need to file this officially," he said. "Raymond can help." I didn't reach for it yet, because I needed to say something first. "Jared, I raised you with everything I had. Not money, but memory, story, patience. And you took all of that and used it to rewrite me." His mouth parted like he might interrupt, but he didn't. "You didn't just erase me from a deed. You erased me from the story of this place. And worse, you replaced me with a version of yourself that never had to apologize." He looked down again. "I'm not angry," I said, surprising even myself. "Anger is for people who want something back. I don't. I have everything I need now." The truth had returned. On paper, in silence, in the way he couldn't look me in the eye anymore. I stood slowly and picked up the folder. Then I left the kitchen and walked toward the front door. Before I opened it, I turned to him once more. "I hope someday you find something you can build without stealing someone else's foundation." Then I stepped outside. The morning was cold, clear. Raymond was waiting in his car across the drive. He stepped out as I approached, opening the passenger door with a small nod. I didn't speak. I just sat down, folder in hand, and closed the door gently. Behind me, the house stood still, not in mourning, but in quiet reclaim. The morning after I filed the documents, I woke up before the sun touched the windows. The air had the quiet weight of a chapter closing. I walked slowly through the hallway, the walls no longer pressing in. The silence in the house felt different now, not like a warning, more like a breath. I brewed my tea and sat at the same table where Jared had handed me the deed just a day before. The folded papers were now at Raymond's office, stamped and filed. There was no need to hold on to them. What they represented had already been restored. The lake outside shimmered, calm and still. I opened the back door, stepped out into the fresh morning light, and stood barefoot on the wooden porch. My feet touched the grain of the boards Daniel had laid himself so many years ago. I closed my eyes and let the quiet hold me. By late morning, I was arranging the bookshelf in the small sitting room. A part of me had always loved this room. The sunlight hit just right around noon. It was a place of thinking, remembering, not explaining. That was when the doorbell rang. Not a knock. A doorbell. The sound felt out of place now, too crisp, too formal. I didn't move for a long moment. When I opened the front door, I saw Jared standing there. Behind him, Emily sat in the car, staring straight ahead. Her face was drawn, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. Jared shifted his weight from foot to foot. His hands were in his pockets. His mouth opened, then closed again. "I didn't come to argue," he finally said. I didn't reply. I only opened the screen door slightly, just enough to show I was listening, but not enough to invite him in. "We sold the car," he said. "Put the house on the market. The staff is all gone." The board stepped down. He looked past me into the hallway. I thought maybe we could talk. His voice sounded tired, not broken, just tired in the way people get when they no longer have excuses left to carry. I've said everything I needed to, I said quietly. He nodded. Still, he said, I thought maybe... His voice trailed off. You thought maybe I'd let you back in, I said. He didn't answer. A squirrel darted across the yard, chasing its shadow on the gravel path. I stepped outside, letting the door fall shut behind me. Jared stepped back slightly, surprised. I'm not angry anymore, I said. He looked at me, unsure what that meant. But I am clear. He waited. I spent too many years making myself small so others could feel big in my presence. Too many years forgiving before apologies ever came. He dropped his gaze. I lived in this house as a mother, a wife, a caretaker. I kept the lights on, the laundry folded, the stories remembered. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You lived here as a guest. Then you decided it was yours. I was wrong, he said quickly. Yes, I said. But more than that, you were cruel. You made me disappear. His shoulders slumped. Not again, I said. Not in this house. He nodded slowly. I didn't know how far things had gone until it was too late. No, I said. You knew. You just chose comfort over courage. Silence stretched between us. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small framed photo. It was of Daniel, younger, laughing, standing next to the canoe. He'd have hated all of this, Jared said. Yes, I replied. But he'd have loved who I became because of it. I didn't take the photo. I let him hold it. Because he needed to. He glanced back at the car where Emily sat unmoving. I don't think she'll speak to you, he said. I'm not waiting on her, I said. He looked at me again, as if hoping for a sliver of what once was. But I wasn't standing in the past anymore. I walked to the edge of the porch. You should go, I said. He turned, paused, then walked back toward the car. I didn't watch them drive off. I turned toward the woods, the pine trees stretching tall and proud in the distance. Later that afternoon, I pulled the old guest book out from the drawer. I flipped past the names: tourists, visitors, donors, fake smiles, and flowery handwriting. Then I reached the last page and wrote something new. Welcome home, Lois. No signature, just the truth. This time, no one else would speak over it. The envelope came in the mail 2 days after Jared and Emily left the porch. No return address, just my name, handwritten with care that didn't feel genuine. I opened it slowly at the kitchen counter, letting the blade of the letter opener glide under the flap as I used to do with Daniel's Sunday paper bills. Inside was a typed letter from a third-party mediator. It confirmed that all legal proceedings regarding the fraudulent transfer of the life insurance and property had been finalized. Attached were the court's certified copies of ownership reassignment, insurance beneficiary restitution, and a financial recovery breakdown. I scanned the numbers once, then again. $773,462.11. Every cent had been frozen and was now returned to me through the account Raymond had set up. It included interest from the holding account the nonprofit had used to shuffle the funds around. It should have felt like a victory. It didn't. It felt like a quiet restoration, like a wall rebuilt, not to show off, but to hold back the rain again. I set the envelope aside and turned toward the window. Outside, the lake rippled under a gentle breeze. Ducks glided across the surface. The trees whispered the way they always had before all the noise came. The next few days passed without interruption. I cooked my own meals, read books I'd meant to read for years, and sat by the fire every evening with a blanket wrapped around my legs and my hands curled around a mug of tea. One morning, Raymond stopped by. He didn't knock. He simply tapped the side of the screen door gently and waited. I opened it and smiled. He handed me a folder, thinner than usual. "Final paperwork," he said. We sat at the kitchen table like we had so many times before. He walked me through each page, patiently, letting me absorb everything. He never rushed me, never spoke louder than needed. That was what made him different. When it was all signed, he leaned back. "Well," he said, "it's all yours again. Officially. Irrevocably." I nodded. He hesitated before standing. "You did good, Lois." I looked up. "You did it without burning the place down." I let out the smallest laugh. He left shortly after, and I stayed at the table long after the sound of his tires faded. That evening, I walked through the house slowly, room by room. The upstairs bedroom still smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. The bathroom tiles had been regrouted, but the mirror was the same. I paused in front of it. For the first time in years, I didn't look tired. I looked whole. I walked into the studio, the one they had turned into an office with acrylic chairs and a faux marble desk. I had already cleared it out, returned it to what it once was. A simple room with wide windows facing the lake, a small writing desk, a rocking chair, and shelves filled with the journals I had once hidden in boxes. I sat at the desk and opened a fresh notebook. I wrote the date in the top corner. And then, for the first time since Daniel passed, I began writing again. Not letters, not legal statements, just thoughts. The kind that makes no noise but needs somewhere to land. Later that week, I took a walk through town. The whispers were still there, of course. People loved to talk, especially when money and scandal had been involved. But I no longer felt the weight of their words. At the diner, Marie poured my coffee and didn't ask about anything. She just refilled my cup before it was empty, like always. It was enough. I returned home in the early evening, the sky blushing orange over the horizon. I stood outside for a long moment before stepping in. The house greeted me like a place never meant to be left behind. Inside, I placed a small photograph on the mantel. One of me and Daniel, younger, standing beside the canoe with mud on our boots. We were laughing, not posing, no plaques, no press, just a quiet life built with tired hands and honest days. The money was back. The house was mine. The nonprofit had dissolved. The papers said so. But what mattered most, what I had reclaimed fully, wasn't on any deed or bank statement. It was the right to live without erasure, to exist without needing permission, and to know, finally, that silence had never meant weakness. It had meant waiting. And now the wait is over. I took the canoe out on a Thursday morning. The sky was the kind of blue that didn't need to be noticed. It just was. I wore Daniel's old flannel jacket, the one I had almost thrown away twice but never could. The lake was still. No wind, no voices, only the steady rhythm of the oar cutting through the water. I didn't go far. Just enough to let the house grow smaller behind me. Just enough to remember that, for so long, I'd felt like a guest in my own life. Now I sat at the center of it. I closed my eyes and let the boat drift. No destination, no demands, only presence. I thought of all the times I had swallowed words to keep the peace, of the rooms I had left quietly when my name was used carelessly, of the meals I had cooked for people who never said thank you, of the years I spent thinking my silence was love. But silence is only love if it's chosen freely. Mine had been expected, assumed, taken. Not anymore. When I returned to shore, I sat on the dock for a long while. My feet dangled above the water like they did when I was a girl. I didn't think about Jared, or Emily, or the nonprofit, or the stolen money now returned. I thought about my mother's hands and the way she used to braid my hair before church. I thought about how Daniel always kissed the back of my neck, never the front. I thought about how the birds still came, even after the trees were cut down. Later that day, I walked into town and bought a small gold plaque. Nothing fancy, just a thin strip of brass and a few engraved words. I nailed it gently to the mailbox post by the lake entrance. It read, Lois Kendrick, resident, still standing. That night, I lit the fireplace. I sat beside it with my tea. I wrote one more line in my journal. I didn't need to win. I just needed not to disappear. And I hadn't. I was still here. I used to think silence was the price of love, that being quiet meant being kind, that if I just stayed steady, just kept giving, eventually, someone would see. But the truth is, they don't always see. Sometimes, they forget who held the door open. Sometimes, they take the whole house and say it was never yours. 12 chapters ago, I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked to machines, my name signed off on papers I never touched. My voice erased everything I once called mine. But today, I sit by the lake in my own chair, in my own home, with my own name on the deed. Not because I shouted, not because I begged, because I remembered who I was, and I acted, not for revenge, but for reclamation. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't curse their names. I didn't turn bitter. I just didn't let them write the ending for me. That's the lesson I leave behind, not just for women like me, but for anyone who's ever been told to hush, to wait, to disappear quietly. You don't have to scream. You don't even have to explain. But you do have the right to take up space, to say, I was here, I mattered, and I will not be edited out. So, if you've ever felt small in your own story, if you've ever been told that silence is strength, and now you're ready to reclaim without apology, then stay, subscribe, and let stories like mine remind you, you're not alone. You're just getting started.